All right, perfect. So good evening, everyone. Welcome for the first Connect call of this year. It's great to see familiar faces, people that have been joining consistently. It's good to see some new faces as well. We're talking about the theme of leadership highs and lows. And I think we're gonna get straight into it, literally. And welcome Adrian, who is a pleasure to have with us speaking today. So Adrian, if you don't know already, but I'm sure a lot of you do, Adrian's a head of school. Um, he is it's his first headship, and in his first year at that school, he secured sort of their best results ever, which is an amazing achievement. He is one of the few black men that has inspected for Ofsted, which is another amazing achievement. Um, Recently, which I'm sure he'll maybe talk about a little bit. He received some amazing Ofsted report himself for his school, which was fantastic to see. And that that last little bit there in terms of Adrian carrying that torch for his mother. So Marva Rollins, OBE. She's done fantastic work in the education space, as most of you will be aware, and Adrian sort of never shies away from the fact that he's standing on the shoulders of of those greats and like his mother. So I'll stop talking. Adrian, over to you. Welcome. Thank you for being here with us. I mean, another thing to say is that Adrian's been a massive supporter of BMT right from the get-go, right from the beginning. So it's only right that we, have him here, sharing with us, sharing that expertise, sharing that leadership. I'm not sure, Adrian, do you have slides to share?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I have some slides. Yeah,
Okay, so let me stop sharing. Um,
I have access to share. Is that right?
yeah, do you have access to share?
Yeah. There's a thing for me. I'll not have to send a request, so you have to give me permission.
Yeah, there we go.
Brilliant. Thanks. Okay. Right. Why is that doing? So, can you see that? Because actually can't. Actually, let's have a look.
Yeah, it's about to come up. There we
Everyone
go.
see that?
Yeah. All right. So
Okay.
just for anyone else that's not familiar with the sort of the structure of the BMT Connect calls, all right. So Adrian will normally share for around 15 minutes, ask any questions at that point that anyone may have, and then we'll stop and then we'll pose a question based on what Adrian's sort of been speaking about, and then we'll go into breakout rooms. Yeah. So that's the general structure. So Adrian, over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, and thanks everyone for coming. You can see I'm still in my suit, so you know that I've not long got home from work, but that's the joys of leadership in school. So, in terms of just before I go into my slides, just a bit of myself. So, yes, I'm in my second year of headship at a secondary school in Wolverhampton. This is my 11th year as a member of SLT and my 23rd year in education. So I've been in the education field for a fair amount of time. Prior to that, my kind of prior career was in professional sports. So I played professional cricket for 10 years, which is what resulted in me living in the Midlands. So I played county cricket for Derbyshire County Cricket Club throughout the 90s and then Northamptonshire in the early 2000s. So I had the pleasure of playing with and against many of the greats in world cricket because there was no kind of franchise cricket. So it was a really good platform for me to then go into education and do what I do, but also gave me the confidence to do that. But I'm just going to talk a bit about. I think the questions are being more around the highs and lows, but just talk about impact as anyone who's aspiring to go into leadership, and talk about that as a starting point. So, and this is not moving. Is it moving? How do you move on to the next slide? Can you see that? Oh, here we go. Right. So I think the key thing is the why, and I'm just going to bring up a few pointers around the why. I mean, you are needed and we are needed, and I think that's really, really important to understand. We are needed in schools as leaders, and I think that's so important to emphasize. And what that actually means and what that takes. It is hard work, and there are lots of highs and lows. But if I talk from a black male's perspective, the last census for educational leadership had black males 0.7%. of heads in the UK, which is startling. And for many of us, we may come across black male heads, particularly if we're in major cities, but even then, it's not regularly seen. So, but that stat is beyond ridiculous. Talking about my mum, Martha Rollins, OBE, when she started, there wasn't even a stat, and she will tell you that. And my mum, I'm very fortunate. She was the first ever black head in London Borough of Newham, and then the first ever black head in London Borough of Enfield. So I had that foundation, or that that kind of what I could see around me, where I knew it was possible, albeit I knew it was hard work, and I can't imagine what it was like for my mum being the first. But you are needed, we are needed. And, it's not good enough how it is, and what needs to happen is there needs to be change. But for there to be change, people have to want change. And I'm not talking people in terms of society or talking about trust leaders or that. We have to want that change, and we have to implement it ourselves. It's going to take us to do it. And what I'm going to talk about in that is what the challenge is, but also what the focus should be when you're going into leadership, and how to keep your focus on what the important things, and some things to think about around that. So when is now. But the focus is on the how to do that, and the key thing around it is self-management, because the knockbacks are so frequent. I wouldn't say infrequent. They're so frequent that they can put you off your stride and actually stop you from wanting to get where you are needed. And not everyone's going to recognize that, but that's really important that you recognize that and you know that. So when I talk about leadership and think about leadership from an education point of view, there's always this thing around, for me, the best schools in terms of leadership have strong teaching and learning. But the most important thing as a leader is that you have to be curious. So if you are curious as a leader, you are going to be in that space which focuses on improvement. And your curiosity comes from the fact that you want to get better and you want to learn more. And that what that actually means in its entirety, because we can't afford to be as good as our peers. We know that we have to be better, and being better means having that knowledge and really kind of deep diving on what's required for that to happen. So in terms of the journey, it's about that investment, and that investment is in yourself. Because for me, you think about what happens if you don't do that. What happens if you know that there are children, young people, not just those that look like us, but generally in all communities that need us. And if we're not doing that, then what happens? What is the fallout from that? Because nobody's going to give it to us. Nobody's going to get the kind of barriers that face us are there. But at the end of the day, what do we focus on? So that self-investment is invaluable. And I'd always suggest what I always do on one day of the week for about half an hour, 45 minutes, I spend that self-investment on what is it that I need to know? What is it that's out there that I need to look at? It might be to do with suspensions. It might be to do with alternative provision. It might be to do with curriculum, or might be a case of revisiting things. It might be to do with the Ofsted framework. But what is that investment? Because nobody's going to do it. You owe it to yourself. And there'll be people that telling you that you're not able to do it. And that's the thing where that self-investment comes into play. And I really love, there's a track called The People by a rapper called Common. And I love that line where nobody believed until I believed me. If we're not doing that for ourselves, and that self-investment is where the confidence comes, because not everyone's going to be there to actually tell you, yeah, you can do it, or it is possible. In fact, you may come across more people that say it's not possible. So that's really important to understand. So food for thought in terms of leadership and thinking about leadership. When you're thinking about leadership, think about teaching and learning. What is the best schools have strong teaching and learning. So what are the most important elements that teaching and learning that are related to your role and people's roles around you? The other thing is, how do you know? And also, what does it look like for those different elements? EA's basic excellence, it's we call high priority attainers. What's it look like for those different elements in the school? Because if you're leading every child, you're leading for every child in that school, you're leading for every member of staff in the school, and you're advocates for every single person in that school, but particularly every single child in that school. So when you're thinking about what that looks like from a leadership perspective, that's your key thing. What does it look like for sixth form? What does it look like for key stage one if you're, or for reception, or for early years if you're in primary? So it's around that being robust, but that being robust as a leader only comes from that self-investment. Because like I said, sometimes you can do an MPQ and that, and they're fine and they're great, and I'm doing one now, another one now, but also that investment in trying to be really curious about how to make things better. And again, driving culture for us as people of color, as black people, or as anyone really, we're trying to drive standards and we're trying to really build things within the schools that we do. So when you're thinking about your leadership journeys, and you have to have these set of questions you had in terms of what you're trying to do, in terms of what is a strong culture in a school look like, how does those relationships drive teaching and learning, or how does teaching and learning drive relationships? And I think that's really crucial. What are the character traits of things? What traits need improving? These are the things that you're constantly looking at. So when I get into school, I'm thinking about what is it I need to know to make things better? What is it I need to know? What is it? What is it? What does it look like in different guises? And that's the thing about being that leadership, that investment. If you are on the pastoral route, that's great. If you're on the curriculum route, but just invest in everything that makes a school effective, because that means that you're investing in everything that makes you effective as a leader. And I think that's really, when learning leaders mean those who basically lead subjects, how they're supported to teams. So think about the pastoral side and the teaching and learning side. So I'll come back to that. High quality teaching provides opportunities for pupils to practice what's being taught. So as a person who leads a school, these are the questions I always ask my team. And as anyone who's aspiring coming up, you have to have that sense of curiosity to how to improve your school, yourself, people around you. Because if you ever become satisfied, then that's when it's over, and that's when it's over. And you can't have that, because children are children, cohorts change, communities change, what's happening in society changes. So you're always having that investment. And that's what I'm talking about. So that impact as more senior leaders, that's the reading that I would recommend, the EF implementation guide for schools, because that's a really powerful thing. And if you haven't read it, I'm a strong advocate for you reading that. So for me, in terms of thing, it's all around, like I said, the EEF. But outside of that, for me, in terms of leadership and leadership journeys, it's around what you are investing in yourself, because it is for the children. What is it the children need in order for them to be the best they can? But what is it you need to keep your cup full so you can lead and drive the school? And that's not just in terms of those kind of information things, also in terms of time away from school. I make sure, I have such a long drive to and from school. It is my total switch off time, because I do 90 miles a day. But on top of that, I make sure a Saturday I never touch any work, and I'm part of the safeguarding team. And I've got a strong team around me. And on Sunday, I literally punch the clock for an hour, because ultimately the work is always going to be there. So if you're trying to negotiate yourself as a leader, you've got to also negotiate looking after yourself in the process. And I think that's really, really, really important. So I'm going to end there, because I could probably do an hour of that. But for me, in terms of, you invest in yourself, as a leader in well-being, and you have that sense of curiosity to help and develop others. But in terms of dealing with the highs and lows, I'm very fortunate. I've got my mum. I've got a network of people around me that helps me, and your network is really, really powerful. But on top of that, make sure that you keep yourself grounded and you stay connected to those that you love and close to you, because they're the ones that are going to help keep you on that journey that you know that you are needed on, so that it doesn't impact what you need to do for those children. So I'll end it at that, because I could literally probably do this. I could probably do a university lecture on it. So I'm just going to stop this share.
Oh, that's fantastic. Um, Thank you, Adrian. It looked like I had my head down, but I was writing notes. So, um, does anyone have any questions? Anyone have any questions directly for Adrian, just about what he's sort of spoken about for the last few minutes? If not, then we'll go into sort of a posed question for us to discuss in the breakout rooms. Um, but any questions, feel free to raise your hands, and yeah, go for it, Andrea Gervais.
Yes, Adrian, thank you for your magnificent talk. I just wanted to ask you a bit more about teaching and learning. In terms of the guidelines, um, how would you compare it to the last ones? Because obviously it has been updated. What do you think this one is more? What's the difference between this one compared to the last one for you? What's the major buy-in?
Are you
No,
talking about the Ofsted or
no, sorry, I was talking about the EF.
EF?
Yeah,
I think in terms, I mean,
the framework.
yeah, ultimately for me, when it comes to from an implementation point of view, the biggest thing that drives any change is about collaboration.
Mhm.
And if you don't have collaboration and everyone on the same page, you're not going to get anywhere. I make sure in my leadership team we do a CPD session at least one every half term. We literally did one today, and it was just help to people recenter, refocus on what's the most important thing, because so many people are doing different roles. What's the most important thing that we are trying to achieve here, and how do we stay aligned for that to happen? So when it comes to the biggest way of implementation is a lot for me is alignment and focusing on what's keeping the most important thing, and you can get caught up in that in different times of the year. So for me, that's the biggest thing for me is actually identifying what's the most important thing, what's the source of that, and where you start from, because you can have an improvement plan all year long,
Mm.
and that improvement plans, the objectives are not really going to be met if you don't keep coming back to not just the plan but also what the how that plan is broken down for that to be effective. And that takes people to be able to be open and honest and to be able to be challenged. And that's a culture that you need to, if you don't have that, that's something that needs to be nurtured, because if you don't have that sense of challenge,
Mhm.
nothing's going to change.
Thank you for yeah, unity. Yeah, I saw that on there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It will go Ava and then we'll go Janoi.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you,
All right.
Adrian. That was really good. You talk about implementation and changes. Um, One of the biggest things that I find, I was previously local secretary of a trade union, and I'm a caseworker as well. So one of the big things that we find with leadership is when new things are implemented without, well, with minimum consultation with the staff. I think when there's going to be changes, you need to ensure that you've got your staff on board with you. And very often we see that, there's fractions created because they haven't got the support of staff. I wonder what your views are on that.
I think your questions in your answers in the question. If you haven't got staff on board, you're not going to get anywhere. And part of the
Yeah.
anything we do is driven through staff. It's driven through conversations with staff. I particularly drive things through the middle leadership more than the senior leadership, because they're the engine of the school, and I recognise and appreciate that. So for me, the key thing is driving things through middle leadership and having those key conversations. I have check-ins with staff. I lead one staff briefing a week. I have other people doing that, but I have an open door policy. So, and also involved, I do actually involve the union and any if there's any key decisions or any decisions I think that affect staff, I infect the unions in once a term. So I invite
Yeah.
them in to have to have meetings with the staff in the school, but to have meetings with me, because I'd like to make sure that I know that what people are happy with and what they have concerns with, because there's always that balance, where there may be things that staff not need to get on with, but that we know that are necessary, and there may be difficult conversations with you. However, ultimately, if you have an unhappy staff body, it's going to be very, very difficult. But my focus is on the children, and therefore the conversation is around the children, and also within that is managing workload so that the expectation of staff is fair and reasonable, but fair and reasonable within the realms of meeting the children's needs. So because I do that, I don't have, of course, there might be the odd grumble here and there, but because I have that open relationship with the staff and the union, it helps keep things running as effectively as they need to be. So, for example, last year when we got our best ever GCSE results, it was done with a reduced workload. People won't work, so it's working with staff to work smarter rather than work
Mm.
harder, if that makes sense, because
Yes.
those conversations need to happen. because
Yeah,
it's the
thank
world we
you.
live in. Teaching historically has been too long-winded. I remember when I started, and I was teaching my subjects maths. I think I had 8 groups, with each one had 30 plus kids, and the policy was to mark books every 2 weeks. That never, no, no, we don't do
Mm.
that. We don't do that
Thank, thank you. Talk about meeting the needs of the children, but it's important that we're meeting the needs of staff
as
as
well.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Ava. Let's go. Oh, there's questions are coming in. Let's go with the last 3 questions. So let's try to keep it quick. And then Adrian, I'm not sure if you have a question posed for everyone yet, but if you, could maybe think of one in the short term. But we'll go, Janoi.
Thank you, Adrian. I really appreciate that. I'm kind of taking a back seat because I actually really want to just learn here. I've got two, but I'll keep it short to one, innit? So the first one is you mentioned like consultation, which I'm all for. Um, I guess the question is like how much consultation is too much consultation in the sense that is it everything that needs a conversation with staff? Or at what point do we drive a decision from the top down and just expect people to go on board with it? Like, what is that balance? Um, yeah, and then the second question I was going to ask is, what advice would you give for working in an SLT team where it's so divided? So in the sense of pastoral SLT members, you stay to this side, teaching and learning, you stay to that side. And in your presentation, you mentioned teaching and learning a lot. I've worked in schools where there's a lot more cohesiveness amongst both, and it's been really good. But I'm working in a spot now where it's very, very divided, and I won't lie, I'm getting very bored of just only looking at pastoral stuff, where teaching and learning also excites me.
So the two things, firstly, in terms of consultation, certain things you have consultations over like the calendar and dates, and you might share the calendar in the first place with staff, and I share it very early. So, for example, for the next school year, staff will receive that by Easter. And the reason I have consultation with them is because even though I might put the calendar together, there may be things that are missed. So, for example, we might have an inset and a parents' evening in the same week. Not that would happen, but that's an example. So things that are open to consultation where you look at how it might impact staff, or the pinch points where there's mock exams and we might have directed time CPD, but there might be an overwhelming amount of CPD during mocks where you might have your English department that's not going to be able to do it, or the mock program might have something where mock exams and you've got English language that because you try and truncate in terms of the time, but staff aren't going to be able to mark and have that turnaround for us to think. So you have those things where you share the calendar and you have the open thing, they're open to consultation because ultimately you got to be able to do something which is manageable. So those things are open to consultation. What wouldn't be open to consultation are your non-negotiables, where it's in terms of how we might start a lesson or the expectations of people to be at their duties on time and things like that, non-negotiable. And from a strategic point of view, if we have, for example, lower results in a certain subject, I'm not going to say to that subject, just keep going. There are certain things that are non-negotiables, and we're trying to drive key things through teaching and whatever it is to improve it. They are non-negotiables. In terms of marrying up the two sides, I don't have a two kind of sided SLT. When I was talking about teaching and learning, if you think of one of the sides, I talked about how teaching and learning influences behavior, or how behavior in relationships influences teaching and learning. So I always try and marry the two. So I'm very much anything we talk about, whether it's within our quality of education team or behavior and inclusion team, we talk about those things in unison. So how is attendance impacting outcomes, or how is outcomes actually impacting attendance? So we bring things together. The key thing for the head is to bring those things together and drive those to make sure it's not compartmentalized. Otherwise, you have problems. So it's the head who really has to drive that, or the two deputies, whichever the format of it is. That's the key thing, because otherwise it could become lopsided, and then you're gonna end up with people disenchanted and just think, like, well, what am I here for? So it's up to the head to keep eyes on it and make sure everything's driven. So whatever, like for instance, today's training session, it was about what people are doing, but how does that drive the common thing for young people achieving? But what does that look like from every angle? So what does that even look like from a safeguarding angle? So it's up to the head or what key leaders to drive that forward. And if that's not happening, you're going to keep having you're going to keep getting what you're getting.
So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Do you know you were sly? You posed the two in one, but it's all right. If and Alex quickly just so that we can get into the breakout rooms by half past-ish, 35
Yeah,
past.
thank you. Thank you. Sorry for my voice. I'm a bit ill, but I have two questions. Thank you very much, Adrian, for speaking with us today. My first question is connected to your point on being curious. What things should we be looking at when it comes to being curious? Like you mentioned things in connection to curriculum and things like frameworks from Ofsted. Are there any other things that we should be looking at? And I think my second question is connected to the to leadership. So yeah, I'm sure all of us went through an experience or have some understanding of some of the concerns we had when it came to the strike action in the past couple of years. And what's kind of come out to me is that I suppose, a lot of SLT focus seems to be more orientated to what governments are explaining and expecting when it comes to safeguarding and of students. And sometimes that doesn't always marry up with what is the reality on the ground. I feel at times that lots of SLT are focused more on just making sure that government key objectives are being fulfilled. And so, for example, making sure that the schools are open to say that students are learning. Is there things that we can be doing to, I suppose, bridge that gap to get SLT or to support SLT in making those changes that are going to be a bit more far reaching, particularly now where we have schools that we have to take on so much. We are at this point the second community, the second point of council. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. If I firstly, the first question in terms of curious, I think it's whatever drives your curiosity. So if you're thinking about, obviously everything's to do with context. So kind of what I say now is linked to what you do in the second part. Your sense of curiosity is in terms of what is it that I know about leadership, or what do I think I know, and then what's the evidence look like? So I'm going to explore that further. And what is it I don't know? So there are some documents like there's the one about the suspensions and exclusions, and that the government document about that, or the one about behaviour in schools. They're good, they're strong documents, and KICSI is obviously a go-to. The inspection framework, the national curriculum. It's whatever you're curious about. If you work in secondary and you don't know what goes in primary, then you need to know. And if you're in primary, you don't know what goes in secondary, then you need to know. So that sense of curiosity is in terms of, if I work in primary, I know where my children are up to, what they're going to next, what faces are next. So what is it I'm teaching primary in year 5 and year 6, and what happens after that? Because that's that sense of curiosity in terms of trying to understand the journey. In terms of the second part, from a leadership point of view, if you're just going to do something to tick a government box, there's certain things you have to do. There's certain things, for example, on the school website, there's statutory information has to be on there, pupil premium strategy, safeguarding policy, all those kind of things. But in the local context, if you're not connected with what's going on there, you can't just be a tick box school. You have to know what's going on in the local context. I meet parents twice a half term to find out what's going on with their children in school, but what's going on in the wider community. I go out into the local community at least twice a week after school. I go walking around. I speak to people at the shops, all that kind of stuff. I read local news. Those kind of things, I would expect my leadership team to also be invested. So part of my thing is to tell me what's going on out there. And also I speak to students, because if you want to know, kids will tell you. So that sense of curiosity then goes into the second part, because the children will tell you what's going on in the local community. And where my school is, there is a lot going on at the moment. And then what you do is you respond to that, because that's your number one priority. Because the number one priority for a school is to keep kids safe and make sure they understand how to keep themselves safe. So the curriculum that is important, and teaching that is important, but the number one priority, the golden thread for any school, is to make sure the children are safe and help them to be safe. So I hope that answers your question.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Adrian.
No problem.
Thanks, Adrian. And last one, Alex. Let's keep it to 2 minutes, bro.
Thank you. Evening, everyone. Evening, Adrian. Just a quick question, but first, and foremost, congratulations with your recent Ofsted inspection. My question is, obviously, having gone into the school, how did you manage to keep expectations, but at the same time improve the school? How did that look like? What was the context?
I think, fortunately, and I do say fortunately, not because I was lucky, but fortunately because I had my experience as an inspector and had led inspections. You could take any school that's that appears to be doing really well and think about how you can make it better. So with that experience, I kind of deep dived the school and I looked at what was the most important thing. The thing for me, when I kind of looked at it, is my first priority in this school is middle leadership. And so for me was to check middle leadership, check where they're at. So prior to getting the role, I actually went to the school. I was released a day a week for half a term. And I managed to use that time to actually get to know the school, to talk to students, but also to meet middle leaders. Did speak to senior leaders as well, but I didn't speak to senior leaders as much as I spoke to middle leaders. Because for me, the workhorses and that of the school are the middle leaders, because they help drive things in the classroom. They help drive things pastorally as heads of year. So for me, I wanted to know from them where they're at and assess where they were at. So for me to identify what was going next, I looked at the data, but actually looked at what was going on, and I looked in books, I spoke to students, I spoke to staff, I had a look for myself. And again, I also went into the community and I looked on websites and various websites, and I looked on the school website in itself. So looking at some of the policies, say, how do I know that the needs are being met for all the SEND students? So I went to have a look for myself. So I had that opportunity. And I think if you are applying for a leadership role, you're not going to have the opportunity to go and spend a day at a school, but please make sure you visit it. And also everything that you've done in your research and looking at the school, make sure that you follow up on that. So for me, the key thing for me was actually finding out for myself, looking at things, looking at what's working well, but still asking questions about how to make things even better. And the key thing for me was, what are those incremental things? I wasn't there going to go with a brush and say, start again, but what are the incremental things and what are the things that I noticed based upon my experience to make things a little bit better? And that's what I focused on, and that's what I still focus on now. What are those little things? But also some of those things, do they happen by design or by default? Because sometimes when a school's doing really well, they just think they just turn up every year and do the same thing. It doesn't work that way. So how do we actually have that set of standards and set of expectations and quality assurance processes to make sure that we keep improving? Because if you don't keep improving, you're going backwards. And that was my focus.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you for your time in the hot seat. Definitely being a hot seat. We had a few questions there, but we appreciate you. Do you have a question for